Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner, for this inspiring speech. You've been talking about the future. Now we will start to talk a little bit about the past. We will start with a main debate called 30 years of Schengen. Was it worth it? So it's not that optimistic as the speech of Mr. Commissioner, the title, but maybe the conclusions will be more optimistic. I would like to invite now our distinguished speakers. And firstly, I would like to invite the first Commissioner for Justice and Home Affairs, Mr. Vitorino, to the stage.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. Good morning to all of you, Minister, Commissioner. I'm supposed to say who I am. I'm a lawyer, a former Commissioner of Justice and Home Affairs. The reason of being here is because 11 years ago, I had the idea of making a proposal on behalf of the Commission to create Frontex. But don't look to me as a father, because a person this high could never be a credible father. Just look at me and say, if you have invited me, definitely it's not a case of a criminal who comes back to the criminal place.
Our second distinguished speaker, Mr. Philippe de Broeker, please welcome to the stage. As an information, you might see in your program that originally a speaker that was invited to the debate was Mr. Philippe Fargue. He couldn't make it. The European Single Sky didn't work for him. He got stuck in Florence. But Mr. de Broeker agreed to take part in this debate, as he's a moderator actually for the debate that will be taking part in the afternoon about Frontex. Would you say also a few words and introduce yourself to our audience?
Hello, dear Minister, dear Commissioner, dear border guards. I am an academic, but I would say a kind of academic migrant, migrating between now Florence, the UI, University Institute, and Brussels University. In practice, interestingly, facing more and more internal border controls when traveling within the Schengen area, personal experience, but it would be interesting to know to which extent this is shared by other person, but also a migrant between theory and practice. I had the pleasure to work with Commissioner Vitorino to draft immigration proposals at the beginning of the years 2000. And, well, I can also maybe tell to Commissioner Avramopoulos that we had a difficult time also already at that moment. I remember representing the Commission in technical groups, explaining to member states the proposals on family unification and economic migration. It has been quite difficult.
Thank you. And last but not least, Deputy Executive Director of Frontex, Mr. Hilarias, please join me into the stage.
Good morning to everyone. Well, I'm a police officer, currently the Deputy Executive Director of Frontex since the very beginning, the setting up of the agency. And in my previous professional life, working 30 years for the Spanish police, out of which 17 dealing with Schengen matters, and fully involved in both the Schengen evaluation, so the works to put in practice the Schengen acquis, and later on, once the Schengen acquis was integrated in the EU framework, also fully involved in the debates to develop and finally approve the regulation establishing Frontex. Therefore, I think that this is the reason why Michał Parzyszek has thought that this background could give me some credits to participate in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. we are going to discuss really serious topic, but before we jump into that part, I would like to invite our speakers to share some personal experiences they have. Mr. Commissioner said about his railway journey through Europe some years ago. Do you remember actually how was it when you crossed the border for the first time without border control, Mr. Vitorino?
Well, being a Portuguese citizen, I still remember the days of Interrail, like the Commissioner. And we needed not only to have a passport, we also needed to have a positive assessment by the secret police and by the military authorities that we were not deserters in potential. So, as you can imagine, coming from a dictatorship that I believe several of you in the room also have remembered these times, having the opportunity to travel without passport was a major shock. Of course, it was minorized by the fact that at that time I was member of the European Parliament and chairman of the European Parliament Committee on Justice and Home Affairs. So it did not come as a surprise. I was prepared for the shock. The shock came afterwards. It's the first day I crossed the border to France without passports. I had an ad hoc control by the French border guard. And when I said to our French friends, listen, there are no more border controls, they told me, yes, we know.
Thank you very much. How about your experience, Mr. De Bruycker?
Well, honestly, I don't remember the first day I crossed an internal border within the Schengen area, but I remember very well our discussions at that time during from 85, and then it took 10 years for really abolishing the internal border controls. We were very impatient at that time, and I have to say also in the academic world, in the European institutions, we were worried about the method, because we had a community objective that had been put in the single act to abolish internal borders, and it was implemented through an intergovernmental method. And some people were reluctant and were against Schengen, the European Parliament. Even the Commission was forced to navigate between around the intergovernmental method. So we were not that confident, but actually we have to admit that 30 years after, we were wrong because the method works and Schengen is, of course, a success.
Thank you. Gile, how about you?
Well, I may have been the one with a slightly different experience, since I had been so deeply involved in the Schengen works and the Schengen evaluation visits prior to the entry into force, the practical implementation of the Schengen acquis, that for me, arriving to Zaventem airport in Brussels without border checks was like something natural. So the natural consequence of the works that we had been doing previously. Therefore, it was not any shock for me to cross Zaventem without passport control.
So you were born to live in an area of free movement.
Exactly.
I understand. So this is how it was, and now we will talk about how it is today. We decided to divide the debate into 3 parts, and not to follow the usual path. We will start with the perspective of Schengen from the outside. Because when we think about Schengen today, we just say, yes, I just go from Latvia to Portugal without any border control. It's natural. But how is it for people that are not EU citizens? How is it for them? Does it mean anything? Is it different? How do they feel about that? And I would like to ask Mr. De Bruycker to start this with his statement.
Thank you very much. Well, I will try to play that role, even if it's a bit difficult, because I don't only have to replace my colleague Philippe Farger, who is a specialist of the neighboring countries and the Arab world, but I have also to speak about Schengen from the outside, while I am a Belgian citizen from the inside. But it's a bit surreal for me. That's not a big problem for a Belgian, so I will try. From the outside, of course, I think that people would tell us that yes, it is easier now to travel within the Schengen area, but quite sure that it's not easier to enter the European Union and Schengen, and that there are maybe more controls than in the past. So facility inside doesn't mean at all more openness from the outside. I'm afraid also that people would tell us that we should take care about the confusion nowadays between migrants and asylum seekers. And actually, you ask us to open a debate. Well, I would like to have the opinion of António Vitorino about the title of the European agenda, which is entitled European Agenda on Migration. I wonder if he would not have decided to have European agenda on migration and asylum, because I think that this word is missing. I think that from the outside, people could also tell us that we should be careful when we use the notion of security, because we use it, we overuse it, and maybe that we lose the sense of that notion. Is it security in a stricto sensu meaning, really a threat in terms in criminal terms, or is it security, public order in a more larger sense about a good organization of the society? And I'm afraid that we are not always that clear about that. I think that people from the outside, I imagine people in Syria or people, Syrians in Lebanon or in Turkey, that they would ask us if we are really serious when we say that we will welcome 20,000 persons through resettlement as an objective for 2020. Really? Only 20,000? While we are millions of internally displaced persons within Syria and millions of refugees in the neighboring countries. From the outside also, I think, and I will finish now, I think that some people, knowing, of course, a bit the European Union, would say, but you propose new tools, new instruments, relocation, resettlement in the agenda for migration. But why don't you use the existing instrument that you have? You have a directive on temporary protection that does exist, and it has never been implemented. And once again, maybe António Vitorino, who was the father, also not only of Schengen, but of that directive as well, could give us his view about should we not use that instrument? Would it not be better to build upon that? Because nevertheless, we have a big political debate about the so-called quotas nowadays. And then I think that definitely from the outside, to finish, I would tell to Europeans, be more solidar. Revise the Dublin regulation, which is based on the rule chacun pour soi. Apply your rules. You have a treaty provision, Article 80 on the treaty, in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which is a mandatory provision on solidarity. Apply it. Stop fighting between member states. Stop fighting between European Union institutions. Be solidar, because we need really your help. Stop hypocrisy, because actually you need, in fact, to be solidar. Nowadays, you cannot pretend that there is no solidarity, because the people who enter through Italy are not always fingerprinted, and then you turn a blind eye to the fact that they go on to other countries. So instead of this solidarity as an hypocrisy, be more clear and play a more solidar game as Europeans.
Thank you. Mr. Vitorino, you've been called to the table. I mean, is there a way to manage to keep the free movement of people alive and manage migration better? Is there a way?
Well, let me just state from the outset that I praise very much the Commission communication issued 2 weeks ago. I think it is a major breakthrough. It is a brave move. It's a politically courageous move because it raises the right questions. And it is compelling for the member states to clarify where do they stand in this debate. Because let's be very honest, when there is a major problem with migration, with all due respect to ministers of interior in the member states, what do they say? What is Europe doing? That's the question. What is Europe doing? And when it comes to the moment of allowing Europe to do something, what do member states do? They just retreat and say, oh, take it easy, calm down. So this kind of schizophrenic debate undermines the political credibility of the management of migratory flows, not only at European level, but also at national level. If we go on with this kind of pushing the responsibilities from one to the other, we will end up being all losers. And Europe is no more a scapegoat than the credibility of national systems of migration management. Having said that, I expect that this Commission communication will create a momentum to revisit some of the decisions that are badly necessary to improve border control, to have a better management of migratory flows, above all the so-called mixed flows, which is a very complex issue. And to a certain extent, what Philip has said, in my view, is that we live in an age of mobility. Mobility has different strands, like migration, economic migration, family reunification, asylum seekers, other forms of international protection beyond the Geneva Convention. And all these elements of mobility raise new problems to border controls and to internal security. What do I mean by internal security? Let's be fair. If there is a space without internal borders, each of you is responsible not only for the security of your own country, but you are also responsible for the security of all the other countries. This kind of interdependence does not allow to have a weak link in the chain. We need all border guards to live up to their responsibilities on an equal foot. And that's why I praise very much the idea Commissioner has just mentioned to create a common standard of border control, because that is fundamental to guarantee the internal security of the European space and to keep a borderless space alive. Because, and I conclude with this, the biggest threat I've always seen in the past, my nightmare, to be honest, was that the manipulation on the debate on migration sooner or later would backfire on the freedom of movement of European citizens. And that would be a major setback for the European spirit and the European ideal. And now we are on the verge of a moment where we will all have to clarify what is our position in what concerns freedom of movement of people. That's a fundamental value, a fundamental right, and it needs to be kept. From the outside, there is only one headed point. I praise very much the fact that also the Commission communication addresses the issue of the time frame of third countries, citizens that can move freely in the European Union. One of the difficulties I had were with the Americans. The Americans always were critical about Schengen. I don't know, Commissioner, if they are still today. They were critical because they said our citizens in the past could be 90 days in each country, and now they can only be 90 days in all Schengen countries. So the idea of enlarging the period of stay of those foreigners, it's much welcome, and if it does not make Schengen more popular in Europe, maybe it will make Schengen more popular in the United States.
Gil, from the border control perspective, do you think European citizens are ready for reintroduction of borders? We've been taught that the 4 freedoms that were promised in the Treaty of Rome always come as a package. But maybe we can divide the package into parts, and maybe EU citizens at the end will agree to lift the freedom of movement.
Well, let me start by stressing something that might be obvious, and it is that over the last 30 years, the situation has changed drastically, also from the border management perspective. Very briefly, I would like to make reference to the few main challenges that the law enforcement community and the border guards in particular are facing currently. The pressure at the external borders, we only have to take a look to the figures in 2014 with almost 300,000 persons trying to cross irregularly the external borders, problem which is further exacerbated by the fact that these persons are entering an area of free movement without internal border controls, where there are still significant differences when it comes to the implementation of the EU policies on migration and asylum. So this makes the situation even worse. Crime, most of these persons are relying at least partially on criminal networks. This is yet something that we have to think seriously about, because the smuggling of human beings is being a really lucrative business, which exceeds even the drug trafficking business. But however, it is still, if I could call it, low-risk form of crime when it comes to effective prosecution. Terrorism is also a big challenge, although it is neither a new threat nor a new challenge for the border guards, but the recent phenomenon of the foreign fighters has somehow become a game changer from the border management perspective. The huge number of suspected persons, from 16,000 to up to 25,000, the fact that they might not have committed any crime, and also that most of them are holders of EU passports, make it really difficult to tackle this problem at the borders. And finally, the mobility, that has already been mentioned by Mr. Vitorino, so I will not touch upon this. Going now directly to your question, if my information is correct, we are in the EU approximately 400 million of Europeans currently traveling without or within the passport-free area. And summing up both European citizens and the third country nationals residing legally in the EU, it makes around 1.25 billion of journeys every year. And this is a very important part of the EU at key. Therefore, it is difficult to envisage to step back or to go back 20 years to the previous system. in more practical terms, for me it's rather difficult to imagine the common border between France and Germany or between Spain and Portugal to be populated again with border guards and border crossing points. Moreover, from my personal point of view, having the possibility of traveling without border checks and the possibility of using the common currency, euros, are probably the two elements that give our citizens, the ordinary citizens, the perception or the feeling that they are real EU citizens. So, to summarize, from a pure political point of view, but also from the practical perspective, I don't see a way back. And just to finish, I do believe, and this is an opinion which is shared by many of our colleagues in Frontex and also in the border guard community, that neither the external border control and therefore a possible reintroduction of internal border checks would be the magical solution for the EU member states and Schengen associated countries' security challenges, if there were such a perception that there is a deficit in the security within the EU.
Thank you. Zooming out again and talking about migration as such and globalization, we talk that we are living in a world of movement, but actually only 3% of global population is working and living outside the country they were born in. So what is the problem? My question to Mr. De Bruyker, is it about integration? This is where we fail? If I remember correctly, it was 2010 or 11 when Chancellor Merkel said that the German multiculturalism has utterly failed. Of course, there was a debate afterwards, but is it where we are failing as Europeans? Integration of migrants?
Well, there is certainly a problem and a question about integration, but I would say that one of the biggest challenges of the European Union for the next years is really to start to understand, to accept, to state officially that it is a continent of immigration. Because this is already the case, it will be more the case in the future. If Philippe Fargue had been here today, he would have given you some figures about demography, making very clear that if the EU doesn't want to be on the decline, it will have to accept more migrants in order to avoid an aging and diminishing population. But we do not accept the fact that we are that continent of immigration. We don't have that culture like the United States, like Canada, or like Australia. Even if, of course, today, nowadays, we can see how many problems even continent of immigration like Australia have. Because for me, it's very strange to take the global view. How can the Australia, which is a continent of immigration, be that afraid of people arriving by sea on its continent by going very far, by sending posters abroad and saying, you will not make it. We will send you back to other islands. So there is certainly a global problem of immigration at the level also outside European Union, but I think that we really at European Union will have to change our culture, which is difficult because, of course, we are, during 30 years of Schengen, have been told that by many politicians, zero immigration is an objective. And this has created a lot of problems, a kind of schizophrenia, to take the word of António Vitorino.
There are people saying that this constant and massive flow of migrants to the European Union is actually eroding the European solidarity. Is it your judgment is similar?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Public opinion is, of course, changing. That's the problem. Very sensitive to emotion. But I think that European citizens can understand and accept the idea that we have to be solidar with Syrian refugees. And I think to take more than 20,000 persons as an objective for 2020. But the problem, I think, is that actually there is not enough trust between the member states, not enough solidarity between the member states. We are not clear if we want to play together or if we continue to play alone. Take Dublin, the rule of le chacun pour soi. Take the blue card, which is not a blue card. And now, I wonder how Commissioner Avramopoulos is going to explain when we will amend the blue card that we have a really blue card, because we will have to sell that abroad. So we have all those problems of fake presentations abroad, which also we should address, I think.
And saying that, you moved us smoothly into the next part of the debate, which is Schengen as a political laboratory of the European Union. And we have a person that was the master chief of this lab, mixing different ingredients to get something good out of it. So, Mr. Vitorino, will you present us the kitchen of Schengen policy making?
Before replying to your question, let me just make a comment. The difficulty of the debate in Europe on migration is that one thing is reality, the other thing are the public perceptions. They do not coincide all the time. And we need to act on the reality, but we cannot ignore the perceptions. If you see the German Marshall Fund survey, that is done every year on a number of EU member states. In all member states, people think that there are more migrants than they really are in their territory. And in some cases, the difference is twice as much as there are. So perceptions do not coincide with realities. And if you want to succeed in your migration policy, you cannot ignore perceptions. So you need to handle perceptions. And you cannot say that there is an unlimited capacity to integrate people in our societies, because that is not true. We have a limited capacity of integration. In the sense that you need border controls, of course, to guarantee that you manage the decisions on entry in your territory. The laboratorial part of the story is that the Schengen Agreement is a revolutionary one. I don't hesitate in using the word. Because for the first time in history, in European history, the decision of a sovereign country about who is present in his territory is not taken by that country, but is shared by a number of countries. You can be in Portugal and have entered through Germany with a Schengen visa. And this revolutionary event is a shift of cultural standards as we used to think about the control of the territory in the past. And we need to adapt to this new situation. It's a laboratorial situation. It is an experiment. Yes, it is. It is a brand new experiment. Having said that, I believe that maybe I'm wrong. I'm old-fashioned, so the figures may contradict me. But my perception is that the vast majority of illegal migrants present in the territory of the European Union do not enter illegally in the European Union. They enter legally. They are what is called overstayers. I mean, they stay after the expiry of their authorized stay in our territories. So you need to have very strict border controls to make sure that you dissuade criminal networks and that you prevent illegal entries. But border control cannot be asked to deliver what it cannot deliver. Then you need to ask other difficult questions, like, for instance, how many illegal migrants do you catch in your territory as overstayers? How many of them are supposed to be expelled? And how many of them are really expelled at the end of the day? And that does not depend on border controls. That depends on law enforcement. And one of the key issues in this policy area is how to combine, in a more efficient way, border control with law enforcement. The interconnection between these two key elements to guarantee our internal security. And I believe this is a laboratorial area in the sense that in some member states, I will not mention which of them, I will be diplomatic today in the morning. I'm less diplomatic in the afternoon, but in the morning I'm more diplomatic. But in some member states, there are some real obstacles of connecting the data of border guards with the data of police and law enforcement authorities. And from my perspective, this is the wrong approach. This is the wrong approach. And we need to have a better coordination between Frontex and Europol at European level, Frontex and Eurojust at European level, because if you want to be effective in fighting the criminal networks that Jill Arias was speaking about, they are very profitable, you need to combine the information you collect from border guards with the information you collect from law enforcement and police agencies. Just to conclude, there is one point where the mission of Commissioner Avramopoulos today is much more difficult than the one I had in the past. In 2002, in the Seville European Council, the Commission launched the idea of the so-called protection in the region. What does this mean? It meant that we should be engaged in giving international protection to those in need of protection as close as possible of their places of origin. That was the concept. So, which would mean that we were engaged, we Europeans were engaged in delivering protection in third countries to those fleeing from civil wars, natural disasters, so those in need of international protection. At that time, I was very much criticized, I must say, with this idea. I was accused of trying to outsource the European responsibilities to deliver international protection. So there was harsh criticism against the Commission, against me, saying, oh, this bloody Portuguese is trying just to outsource what we Europeans should be doing. In practical terms, the idea was precisely that if we were effective in delivering protection in the regions, we would avoid those people from being in the hands of the criminal networks and even risking their lives, as they are today, when crossing the Mediterranean. So I'm sorry, I was right. I'm sorry. The difference is that today, the task of Commissioner Avramopoulos is much more difficult, because all those countries where we could try to start building some kind of cooperation and capacity building in those regions, after the Arab Spring, all those countries are in a very unstable situation. So I know that I'm going to be criticized for saying this. Okay, I'm used to. I'm not making the apology of authoritarian regimes, okay? Let's be very clear. I'm not saying that Tunisia under Ben Ali, or Libya under Gaddafi, or Egypt under Mubarak were more reliable countries. I'm not making that apology. But what I'm saying, and this is the reality, is that in those times, those countries were more capable to control their borders than they are today. And so if we have a strategy of cooperation with the neighborhood, which is fundamental, we have to acknowledge in our strategy that those countries today are less equipped, less prepared, less stable, less willing to engage with us in that cooperation. And that makes our task more difficult, and that makes, I'm sorry, Commissioner Avramopoulos, your task much more difficult than my task 10, 12, 15 years ago.
On that note of the neighborhood, Gil, the threat of instability and the perception of security deficit brings European security and defense policy closer and closer to internal security. How do you imagine, how will it work? What can happen? Will it merge all in all?
Well, it is obvious that Antonio has also touched upon the exchange of information and the interagency cooperation, which is vital to strengthen or to enhance the internal security. In the scenario that I described earlier in my first intervention, it is becoming even much more important, one of the principles or conditions for the creation of the Schengen area, which is to keep a high level of security at the external borders. But I have also said that border control, border management, and border control is not the panacea. So whereas, of course, and I think that we all can agree that border management has an important role to play in safeguarding security, there are many players here, and all of them have a role. Actually, border control is just a small piece of the puzzle, which is made up of many other components, and therefore the multidisciplinary approach has to be applied and has to be enhanced further. And this includes, as I said earlier, the interagency cooperation. In this regard, I will not describe what the agency is doing, because actually we are already applying such an approach. So the immediate reaction with joint operations, as the one that has been mentioned today here a couple of times, the joint operation Triton or other joint operations, the mid-term action, which is equipping the border control authorities with information system, new services and training, and the long term, which is the engagement with pre-frontier actors like the European External Action Service and the CSDP missions, and also the EU delegations abroad and the network of immigration liaison officers, and also, and even more important, the non-EU counterparts. In this scenario, even if the perception continues to be that there is a deficit of security, well, we have already seen in the past this sovereignty clause that the member states from time to time make use of, which is the reintroduction of the border checks. But I would not like to contradict myself. I said earlier that reintroduction of border control would not be the magic solution for the security challenges within the EU.
Yeah, thank you. Still on this political part, because politicians at the end of the day need to take into account what people say. We've been very ambitious in the EU, from all the critics that about the Schengen zone. EU leaders have shown courage, accepting Tampere program, Hague program, Stockholm program, but maybe now EU citizens, maybe they have enough of liberalization. Maybe they would like to come back to the old good Europe that is made of Heimat, the homelands, and not to be so much in this globalized world. Mr. De Bruyker, how would you react to that?
Well, that if you think that these were the good old days, that it's over. I think a very interesting country for that is, for instance, Switzerland. Because when you think about the debate around the referendum in Switzerland, you may think that it's about a feeling against foreigners and a kind of racism. But if you look carefully to one of the main documents that was published by the party who initiated the referendum, actually you don't find that rhetoric that much inside. What they explain is that they want to keep Switzerland as a little country, as a small country, that they have problems if the population is increasing with the delivery of public services. So actually, they dream to keep Switzerland as a little country in the European Union. And of course, I think, how can you imagine to pick and choose the advantages and the disadvantages of globalization? That's rather difficult. But once again, I think that the good old days are over. Tomorrow, when I say tomorrow, in the next 20 years for sure, we will have to change our culture and our mind. And I would not be surprised that within a few decades, 20, 30 years, the main problem of the EU and conclusions of the European Council, the priority will not be the fight against irregular migration, but how to attract more migrants. If we don't switch our brain to that reality, at one moment we will be late to cope with that new reality. I know that nowadays this is extremely difficult, but we will have to face that debate.
So I understand that it was worth it to have Schengen. We have a very optimistic sign here. One more to Mr. Vitorino. In your recent paper that you wrote together with Yves Bertoncini, you said that Schengen can mean more freedom and more security at the same time. This is a revolutionary idea because we've been hearing for many, many years that it's a choice, freedom or security. It can be balanced, but it cannot be more of this and more of that.
Now, let's be honest, there is always in life a tension between freedom and security. It's never a given. I mean, you don't find anywhere in the world a perfect system that found the exact equilibrium between freedom and security. It's a search, a permanent search. I see some faces here in the room. I see Bob, who was at that time also involved in these discussions with the Americans after the 9/11 and after the terrorist attacks in the United States. And definitely we, the Europeans and the Americans, we were not totally in line on how we should protect freedom in face of a new terrorist threat. And there are differences that you can find in history. We Europeans, we did not create special courts for terrorism. We have dealt with terrorism as criminal activities as they are, but we have assigned the task to trial the terrorists to common criminal courts. We did not deprive the terrorist suspects from the rights of defense that our legal system recognizes as being fundamental for the rule of law. And that's the way we Europeans address the issue of how to keep the equilibrium, the balance between freedom and security. The Americans chose a different way. They created special military commissions to trial the terrorists. They deprived the terrorists from some rights of defense. They even created Guantanamo. If you look to what has happened in these last 10 years, one must say that today the Americans are closer to our approach than to their original approach. And I think that we Europeans that have a very good tradition of self-punishment at least should be proud of the fact that we have gone through a very difficult period of our history and we have kept our commitment to the basic values that we fight for. Having said that, of course, I believe, to be honest, if you think that re-establishing national border controls, putting an end to Schengen, you reinforce your security, you are absolutely wrong. And I'm very adamant on this point. You are wrong. And that is a terrible mistake. Because if you go back to the national level, there will be less incentives for European cooperation in law enforcement, in police cooperation, in secret services cooperation. And the threats we are confronted with are transnational threats. Even homegrown terrorism, one must recognize that the terrorists that were born in Paris, they were trained outside the European Union, they came back, and definitely they did not benefit from anything from Schengen. I mean, it was not Schengen who benefited. And I will conclude with an example. I know that my British friends in the room will be cross with me, but that is the reality. You remember July 2005, the terrorist attacks, terrible attack in London. You remember that one of the suspects, one of the terrorists that committed the terrorist attack in London in July 2005 was arrested in Rome by the Italian police, thanks to a European arrest warrant issued by the British authorities. And how I remember the European arrest warrant was criticized at the time by the British, but then nevertheless. Okay, he was arrested in Rome. Let me just put one question. How did that guy arrive in Rome? The answer is he left the UK. He left London being under the suspicion of being a terrorist. Second question, how did he leave the UK? Answer, he passed through UK border control, not Schengen border control, okay? Sorry, British friends.
And that brings us to the third part of our debates, which is about Schengen at the border, about the flanking measures. Does it really work? I mean, how is the situation today? Gil, please.
Well, not only the border, but as a general precondition for the Schengen area, which is what we have called the compensatory measures. We have many, although some of them have not been strictly linked or developed under the Schengen legal framework. But we have the police cooperation that has been mentioned, a very good example right now by Mr. Vitorino. The common visa policy as well, and many others. I do believe that those compensatory measures are still valid. However, there is a need from time to time to make a review and to update or adjust those to the needs. And here I'm missing a bit of more flexibility, so a mechanism which gives flexibility to react more quickly. Just to put an example, we have been witnessing the debates in the EU about the foreign fighters and the problem of making thorough checks on those EU citizens that arrive to the EU because of the Schengen acquis that establishes this light border check or just waiving the passport. Making the necessary changes to the Schengen Borders Code will surely take a long time. And I think that this is hampering somehow the effectiveness of the tools we have at hand to fight against these security challenges. Therefore, the compensatory measures is still valid. Constant monitoring and review, and to imagine or to work out a bit of flexibility to react more quickly.
Okay, thank you. I understand that Hill is in a difficult position to talk about politics, so my question to two other panelists. The Internal Security Fund provides 2.7 billion euro for visa and borders. The Commission announced the creation of Union standard for border management in the last agenda. Smart Borders initiative will increase the efficiency of border crossings. There is Eurodac, we have VIS, SIS. They're working well, sometimes with some problems. The new Schengen evaluation mechanism is in place already. Is it enough, or is there anything needed to make the Schengen area work better at the border and inside the inside the Schengen zone?
Is it enough? Well, very good question. If we listened this morning to Commissioner Avramopoulos, and he already mentioned the fact that the mandate of Frontex should be reinforced. So it's clearly not enough. And I think that there is a really pending question about the future of Frontex. Who is in charge of controlling external borders in the European Union tomorrow? Because, again, today the situation is a bit schizophrenic. Who can say, I have always difficulties to teach this to my students, are the borders European or national? External borders at EU level, but under the responsibility of each member state in the Schengen Border Code. It's very ambiguous, and I think that we have now to seriously open a new debate about the future of Frontex. I know that it will be, of course, a very difficult debate, but the debate of the creation of Frontex was already difficult. So there is nothing new with that. I don't know exactly what we have to do, certainly to increase increase solidarity, to have more financial tools, to Europeanize border controls through the funding, or more institutionally. There we have a broad debate that we need to have. I don't have the magic solution, of course, but I think that we will not avoid that. We have in the treaty a provision that is rather open, integrated borders management system. You can say it doesn't allow you to go very far. On the contrary, you can do almost whatever you want. This shows exactly where we are, in the middle of the discussion that we must have quite soon.
Mr. Vitorino?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, my feeling is that as Commissioner was saying a few minutes ago, if we want to be more active in preventing undesired migratory flows, we need to collect information on a preventive side, and for that purpose, there is a need to have a better cooperation, not only with neighboring countries, the ones who are able to do that, but also in between Frontex and the European security agencies, including the network of border guard, of migration officials, and also the police. Because I do believe that Europol is in charge of tracking the criminal networks that operate on a transnational basis in trafficking human beings and smuggling migrants. To be honest, I'm just going to say something a little bit controversial, but I've always been puzzled with the fact that there are very few convictions for trafficking human beings of European Union citizens. We pretend that the networks only operate outside the territory of the European Union, because we just touch the point of the fingers of those networks. But those networks have a chain of command. Those networks have bosses up there. And some of those are in the EU member states. And the need to connect the information gathered by Europol and by the secret services and the border guards is fundamental to be more effective in dismantling the criminal networks. It's not enough to have the idea that if you destroy the boats, you destroy the criminal networks. Destroying the boats is important because it is symbolic. It shows that we have the hands on. So I don't criticize that move. I don't ask to that move major changes, because the rotation will be higher only in the naval industry down there. But in practical terms, what I do require for it being more effective, it's to have a better link between police cooperation and border guard cooperation when it comes to the dismantling of the cross-border criminal networks that operate in trafficking in human beings and smuggling people. One last remark about the IT systems. I feel a little bit guilty because we launched so many IT systems. I launched a few in my times, the SIS2 and the VIS, the Visa Information System, and Eurodac. Those were my responsibility. The others came after. Anyway, we cannot just have the proliferation of IT systems. We need to have an assessment of the effectiveness of each of them and how we could streamline those systems. Yes, interconnecting data, definitely, with all the guarantees of privacy. A lawyer is supposed to say that, so I'm a lawyer, I will say that, with all the guarantees for privacy, but we need to be a more streamlined use of IT and information systems at the service of a joint management of the borders.
And on that note, a question to Gil. The measures that were introduced to reinforce potential security deficits, the flanking measures, compensatory measures, what is your assessment? Didn't we go too far? You are talking about merging different informations, of course, with proper security for personal data. But maybe, again, from the citizen's perspective, maybe we went too far intruding to citizens' life with myriad of surveillance tools, personal data collection. How do you see it from the law enforcement perspective?
I might repeat myself, but sharing information and exchanging information is vital. What we probably need is to explain to the civil society why do we need information, why do we need data, and why do we need to exchange such an information. So being more transparent and explaining the reasons, I think that this should release any concern from possible criticism or fears when it comes to process personal data. And we have to do it, and we have to do it at the European level, as Mr. Vitorino said earlier, because we have also learned, and this was also something that probably the colleagues from Europol can even explain better than me, that there are some challenges when it comes to share information even between the national agencies. One of the main challenges when it comes to fight terrorism and foreign fighters is that really sometimes the intelligence services are not so ready to share the information with police or with other other law enforcement authorities. Therefore, this has to be handled much better, and it might be that one solution is to do it at the EU level if it does not work so well at the national level.
Thank you. Last question to Mr. De Broeker before I give the floor to our audience. We are talking here about security, borders, migration. Can you solve the issue of border security, of security in general, if it's not properly harmonized with migration, the treaties do not leave much room for maneuver for the European Commission. This is the national competence and social policies. So is it possible that these hard national competences will ever be transferred to the EU level?
Well, those national competences, I think, are already, for a large part, transferred to the European level. If you think about migration, there is the idea. The problem is that we don't know exactly what it is of a common immigration policy. But the EU has a large competence in the field of migration. Well, António Vitorino will certainly remember when he had to negotiate the constitution at that time, and the provision reserving to member states the power to set quotas for third country workers coming from abroad.
And this is exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah, but it's only that. And I don't see this really as a problem, because honestly, I don't ever think that in Brussels, anybody has had the idea of setting quotas of workers for that sector in Lithuania and set another sector in Spain. This is an absolutely false nightmare that people, if they think of it, that they invent it really. So we need really now, I think that's another task that we have to do. We have seriously to address the issue of what is a common policy for legal migration. How far can we go in that? And in very precise terms, taking into account the history of the member states, their colonial links, the different geographical positions that they have, the different traditions that they have, the different numbers of migrants that they have. But now it's really time also to address seriously that issue. What can we do in terms of a common policy for legal migration? It's a very difficult question. In the European agenda, there are some elements about that. I think it's very good that the Commission has put those on the table, even if from my point of view, it's not enough. We need to go further because it's a pending question since, well, 2001, when the Commission, Commissioner Vitorino at that time, launched the idea of applying the open method of coordination to the field of immigration. Now we are less careful about that. We will need to go further on that point also.
And Mr. Vitorino, what would you advise to Commissioner Avramopoulos before the June Council, how to convince member states about the quotas? We've been already hearing negative voices from France, Poland, Hungary, Spain.
Well, one of the golden rules is that you never should give any advice to your successors. That's a golden rule. No, the only thing Philip recalled the debate in 2001. We were 15 member states at that time. The Commission made a proposal on an open method of coordination for legal migration, and I went to the Guinness Book of Records because I had 14 member states against me. The only one who was not against me was my own member state, Portugal. They did not agree with me, but the Prime Minister was my friend. Having said that, I mean, I think that the current Commission communication picked up the debate on the exact place where we left it in 2001, using EURES, trying to bring more transparency and coordination to the admission policies of the member states, keeping the decision at national level, but bearing in mind two key things. First, the needs of the labor market, because only each member state is capable to assess the needs of its own labor market and the capacity of integrating migrants. There is no successful integration of migrants if they do not have a job. and the job-driven policy is fundamental, and that can only be assessed at national level, quite clear. Integration is a micro process, is not a macro process, so it should be handled not only at national level, but even regional or local level, because the success of integration lies there. The European level can have a supporting role for integration policies, but the fundamental of integration policy is at local level. We should have more transparency in the coordination, because in fact, I always tell this story, we in Portugal, we had several thousand of Ukrainians in the early 2000s in the public works. They were legalized, they were regularized, they became legal migrants in spite of the fact that they were overstayers, but then they were regularized, Portuguese autonomous decision. Then the civil construction and public works in Portugal became declining, but in Spain there was the boom of the real estate. What did the Ukrainians do? What any normal people would have done? They just crossed the border, which, by the way, does not exist. They went to Spain with a simple fact. When they crossed the border, they were no longer legal migrants. They became illegal migrants in Spain. That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. I mean, one member state legalized the number of irregular migrants, and then, moving behind the functioning of the labor market, they just went to Spain and they became illegal. Was there any coordination between Portugal and Spain in this respect? The answer is no. So this is absurd. There is a need to have an instrument where at least the member states try to exchange information and coordinate their national policies of admission. And I hope that this Commission communication will confront the member states with the need to address this key issue. Because there is one point where I agree with former President Sarkozy. When he says that one member state decides to legalize irregular migrants, that decision in a borderless space has impacts in other member states. He's right. It's true, but that is another argument on my behalf in favor of a better coordination of legal migration policy, and not the argument in favor of re-establishment internal border controls. That's the point where I depart from President Sarkozy.
Thank you very much. Now it's the time for the audience, but the European Commission has been called so many times to the table that we will maybe give a chance for Mr. Laurent Michel to have a 2-minute intervention. Over there.
I don't want to sit on your mobile phone. Just to react to what Philippe de Broecker has said on the title of the European Agenda on Migration, I think migration has to be looked at in a holistic manner, in a comprehensive manner. And we are covering, if you look carefully at the agenda, every aspect of migration, legal migration, irregular migration, but also asylum policy. The terms quota, we don't use the terms quota in our communication. In fact, we are not setting up quota, we are setting up an objective, a 20,000 objective for resettlement. You said that it's not an ambitious objective, but if you look at the last 10 years, the number of people resettled on average in Europe was around 5,000 to 6,000. So we are proposing to multiply by 4 the numbers. I think it's quite a big objective. And you have also to take into account that last year, for instance, you had 100,000 Syrians who have arrived in Europe. So the pressure is quite high, and we have to deal with our public opinion. So 20,000 is really an ambitious objective. It's not a quota, it's an objective. On the relocation, what we are proposing is also not a quota. We are proposing a distribution key, how to allocate the asylum seekers in clear need of international protection to other member states. On the Schengen border management, I think it is very clear that it lies in the responsibility is in the member states. So there is no schizophrenia. We know the rules for the last 30 years. Member states are responsible to control their borders. Frontex comes in support to the member states. And we are developing a union border management. That means we have union standard, we have integrated border management for Europe so that the rules are applied the same. But the ultimate responsibility lies in the hand of the member states, and we are controlling the member states with a Schengen evaluation mechanism. And the new thing is that it is the Commission in the lead now to control, to evaluate the way the member states are acting. But the responsibility is still in the member states' hands. Just one word on the destruction of boats and the CSDP mission, because Mr. Vitorino said it's a symbolic measure. I think it's more than a symbolic measure. We have seen that smugglers are using 4 times, 5 times the same boat if it is not destroyed. And there is a lack of boats in Libya. The more they are in need of boats, the more we make their life difficult. And if you look at the experience of Spain in the Canary Islands, that was the tactic to destroy the boat, to prevent the smugglers to use boats. And that's one of the main objectives of the CSDP mission, and I think it will have an impact. But let's face it, when we cut one route, the pressure will be on another route. So we see already a decrease of the numbers of people, of Syrians arriving via Libya, and an increase on Greece. So we have to continue to work, and one of the objectives, if you look carefully, is not only the tripling of Triton, but also the tripling of Poseidon, because the pressure will also be on Greece, not only on Italy. The increased pressure and the numbers are going to Greece now. So we have to really be flexible in our operations to be able to move to one side to the other. Poseidon and Triton has to be looked in a coordinated and unique manner. Finally, one word on responsibility and solidarity. It's kind of chicken and egg situation. The North say to the South, be responsible. The South say to the North, we need solidarity. And I think that next week we'll propose with our relocation scheme a way forward to bring all together. Member states in the South will have to act responsibly. They will have to take serious measures in identifying people, fingerprinting the people, and the North will show solidarity through the relocation mechanism. And that's a way to break this chicken and egg situation that we have seen for so many years. So the ball will be in the camp of the Council, as Mr. Vitorino said. They always ask for more Europe. Now Europe is coming. They will have to take their decision in a responsible manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now it's the audience time, so I'm waiting for any questions to our speakers or any comments to what they said. We have a call here.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. My name is Kostas Karagatzos. I'm a retired Commodore of the Hellenic Coast Guard and associate member of the World Border Organization. I have a few comments, so I will try to be very, very brief.
Please try.
Yes, very, very brief. So, being for 22 years a border practitioner, I have been witnessing, together with you, mixed migratory flows to Europe, which means economic migrants and refugees. And in the past, the vast majority was economic migrants. In the last years, we all agree that the majority is refugees. So this is the phenomenon we are facing. But migration as a phenomenon is not new. It has been happening for thousands of years and is not expected to stop for various reasons. Natural phenomena, civil wars, poverty. So migration is not expected to stop. So my question, my rhetorical question is, what is the real problem? Is it migration or illegal migration, namely migration done in an illegal way? I believe that we all agree that illegal migration is the problem. And then many would ask, but what can we do? Can we make illegal migration legal? I'm afraid that this is not possible. But can we do something else? Maybe we can make migration regulated. But then many will say, how can we do that? By reinforcing migration through legal channels. Believe me, the problem is not the Schengen area. Schengen is the European thesaurus, is a great accomplishment for Europe. The problem is not Schengen area. But what is Schengen really? Schengen is an area of freedom, security, and justice. But for who? For those entering it legally, not those entering this illegally. Because then we have unlawful activities continuing. So what can we do? Is it the problem on the Schengen? Should we abolish Schengen? Of course not. This would be a tragic mistake. The key factor is the organized crime. And sorry, Mr. Vitorino, I will disagree that the main smugglers are based in Europe. In my opinion, the main smugglers are based in the countries of origin. And no matter what police measures we take, these barons will continue sending refugees and migrants to Europe illegally. So this is the critical point. What do we need to do? In my opinion, call me a dreamer. We need to isolate refugees and migrants from the criminal networks. We need to isolate. And then you will ask, how can we do that? What if refugees and migrants ask for asylum and residence permit in the third countries, outside Europe? Yes, many of you will say that, come on, this is a pull factor. We will have a bigger number of refugees in Europe. We need a lot of staff to do the job and things like that. Okay, I can accept this. But can you imagine the advantages for such an action? I will mention an example to make it more clear to you. I'm a refugee from Mali, and I flee Mali, and because I have family to France, I want to go to France. So what is the situation right now? I am exploited by organized crime to reach the last departure country, which is Libya or Algeria or Morocco, to reach Europe. Then I board an unseaworthy vessel, risking my life to reach Europe. If I manage to reach Europe, then I am arrested by the authorities. Since I want to go to France, I will not ask for asylum in Greece or Italy, because I will be stuck there. So the authorities will release me, and once again, the organized crime will exploit me, offering a variety of facilitating services so that I reach France. This is the situation right now. We should admit it. Can we do something else? Okay, this is the moment that you will call me a dreamer. But what if I had the chance, for example, to go to the French embassy in Senegal and apply for asylum there, and have my asylum claim examined, and be granted asylum and taken legally to Europe? What would be the advantages? Please listen. First, I don't need to go to Libya. Second, I don't risk my life in the Mediterranean or at the green borders. I'm safe. I'm taken, I am escorted by plane from Dakar to Paris. And of course, the organized crime cannot exploit me at all. Of course, you will say, we cannot do this for every refugee and every economic migrant. We should bring half of Asia and half of Africa to Europe. Yes, I agree. And that's the point that we have to speak about criteria that are very well described in the European agenda. These criteria should be the reason for granting or not granting asylum. But can you imagine this solution? Mr. De Bruyker, you spoke about policy of Australia. You're right, but there is a slight difference. In the last 16 months, Australia has 0 tragedies at sea and no dead migrants. Nobody died there. They have a strict policy. Yes, I agree with you, but nobody died. In the Mediterranean, only in 2015, we have more than 2,000 migrants dead. We cannot allow this to continue. We are Europeans. We are very sensitive. We have to stop it. And we have the tools and the ways to do it. Okay, I don't want to take more of your time, Excuse me for going too long.
It was a perfect... It was a perfect intervention because there was a question and the answer already, so I don't need to ask the speakers. We are coming to the end of the debate. It's just right on time. I will just give a chance to our speakers for 2 sentences for each for each of you. How would you like Schengen to look like in 10 years' time? In 2 sentences.
I hope that we will have a Schengen area with more control, but also that it will not undermine mobility and freedom, including people from abroad, third country national citizens. I don't know, because it's a kind of philosophical question about control and freedom. Do you trust the state or not? My dream is that control will be also the occasion to give more freedom.
Thank you. Mr. Vitorino?
Well, to be honest, the communication that launched the creation of Frontex 11 years ago said that Frontex would be the embryo of a European border guard. The communication that was adopted by the Commission 2 weeks ago says that we have a European, this is the beginning of a European system of border guard plus a coast guard. I hope that in 10 years' time there will be no communication saying that it's going to be the beginning of that.
And Hilarious?
Honestly, I'm a bit skeptical on the possibilities of the European border guards to fly. But anyway, from my personal point of view, Schengen, despite not being perfect, is good enough and healthy enough to survive not 10 but 20 years more.
Thank you very much. And that's the end of debate. Thank you very much for staying. Big clap for our distinguished speakers. Thank you.